Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Yamos Hey Bucks. I am Drew Sample, and we're joined as usual by my co-host Andrew T. Evans, also known as Andy Evans, to everybody else, and a very special guest, one of my favorite beat writers, Mr. Dillon Davis of the Delaware Gazette. How are you two gentlemen doing today? I'm like how I asked you both at the same time. No one would want to talk.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Dillon, it's good to see your smiling mug. I feel like I haven't seen you in at least, 10 hours or so?
It's been every bit of 10 hours, so a little too long.
And of course, Drew, it's always good to see your smiling face.
A lot's happened in those 10 hours as well, so.
I know. A lot has happened since, we left the stadium yesterday for sure.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. Buckeyes beat Maryland in a 37-17 win to go 5-0, 2-0 in conference play. Now 9-0 all-time versus the Terrapins. The Buckeyes and the Terrapins, I think, are now like 0-25 against ranked teams, like a really awful stat. Trailed 10-0 to the Terrapins in the first half, but tied up before the end of the half. OSU then outscored the Terps 37-7 after that, thanks to a 17-0 fourth quarter. Kyle McCord had another steady above-average day of 65% completion versus Terrapins with 320 yards and 2 TDs, 0 interceptions. A pretty ugly running game, and let's get into it. You guys are the beat writers here. Dillon, what are your thoughts of yesterday's game? Like, break down what your takeaways were.
I'm sure we'll talk more about the running game in here in a little bit, but it's hard for me that not to be the biggest takeaway is that this team is trending towards can't run the ball. They're not running the ball well. It's the trending towards they can't run the ball, which is alarming. And I know they have an opportunity next Saturday against one of the worst run defenses in the country. So maybe that'll be a get right game, if you will. I'm not even sure what we would learn from it if they do, but we'll get to that later. But that was my biggest takeaway, was that, just running the football is just not really in the cards for this Ohio State team for a variety of reasons. But my other biggest takeaway in general, talking about this game was that, for large stretches of that game, Maryland looked like a better football team. And if they didn't help Ohio State, with the 2 turnovers, one that, ended up being points, and the blunder before halftime where they should have gotten at least 3 out of it and they never got a playoff. If they don't help Ohio State, I'm not so sure they don't win that football game. So, and that, and it doesn't matter. Ohio State won the game. They're 5-0. That's all that matters. And I agree with that. But, Maryland had to help them there. Maryland committed every foul against the book of upsets, the book that tells you this is how you go on the road to a big favorite and win a game. And Maryland committed every sin in the book, turning the football over, taking points off the board, crucial penalties, things like that. So, they helped Ohio State out a lot there. But the bottom line is they won the game, but just not a very good performance, and certainly concerning when you talk about coming off a bye week, coming off of a big win like that at Notre Dame. You would think that, that's the kind of a game I expected Ohio State to play if they had to play the very next week. After that Notre Dame game, you're flat. That was a lot of emotion in the Notre Dame game. You try to get back up for that. Sometimes it just doesn't work like that. You saw Notre Dame play kind of flat against Duke. But to have a bye week to come down from that and to build off of that, it was really disappointing.
Andy, what were your takeaways?
I mean, pretty much same thing that Dillon just said. You look at what Ohio State did and did not do. They did not run the ball well. Kyle McCord, I thought, played just another solid game of football. If it wasn't for Maryland shooting themselves in the foot, and finally the defense getting after Tungavailoa, I mean, it took them virtually until that. I mean, it started in the second half. But even then, it was a close game through the first 3 quarters. And thanks to them locking down in the fourth quarter, I mean, they outgained Maryland 146 yards to 10 in the fourth quarter alone. Thanks to a pick 6 in the first half by your boy Josh Proctor, Mr. Davis. I think we're gonna talk about him here in a couple minutes, but that was their only points in the first half, a daggone pick six. And it was funny because at the end of the half, and you just pointed it out, Dillon, Maryland, they're out of timeouts, but they're in position to at least get 3 points out of the situation. They're in Ohio State territory, and bad clock management. And Tagovailoa hits his guy who gets tackled in bounds, can't get up to the line fast enough to at least spike the ball and give themselves an opportunity for an extra 3 points, which would have been huge going into the second half because Maryland got the ball back and Tagovailoa immediately led them down the field on that opening second half drive and scored to take a 17-10 lead. So it could have very well been 20-10 after that opening drive of the second half. But it was funny because our buddy Pat Murphy from Bucknuts pointed out on X that Ohio State acted as if they had just won the game. Like the way that they were celebrating at the end of the half, they're jumping up and and they're cheering and they're running off the field all excited. And Tagovailoa's hanging his head. You would have thought they had just won the game. But that was just the end of the first half. But I guess any sort of motivation at that point was paramount to get them, to where maybe they needed to be to win that football game. And like you said, Dillon, I mean, it was ugly, but ultimately Ohio State, they just had the bigger, stronger, faster horses to outlast Maryland through a 4-quarter game.
To that point about the way that they celebrated that, botched field goal opportunity at the end of the first half. I mean, that was probably representative of everything that had happened in the first 30 minutes of that football game, right? I mean, they needed that. That was a win on the field for Ohio State to not give up those points there, not go into halftime trailing Maryland because, obviously they would have went in the trailing. That was a win, and it was indicative that reaction was indicative of how that entire first half went. They needed that win, and as we saw, they struggled in the energy department, that throughout that entire first half. I think they were trying to manufacture energy there. And, I guess it worked to some degree because, they ended up playing much better in the second half. But, that was an important moment in that game, not just for taking points off the scoreboard, but, Ohio State needed that. They needed something to go into the halftime feeling good about. So, anyways.
Absolutely, 100%.
Well, moving on, Kyle McCord, as you said, Andy, another stellar start. I mean, 19 of 29, 320 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's his career high passing game. He's fourth right now in TD passes with 8. Is that fourth in the Big Ten? Andy, I'm guessing fourth in the Big Ten. Number 2 in the Big Ten passing efficiency. Third in Big Ten yards. Second in Big Ten with only 1 interception thrown. It's actually a pretty good stat. Andy, let's switch to you. Let's start with you. So overall, what are you thinking of McCord so far?
How can you be disappointed in this performance? We talked last week, Drew, and you brought up, hearing some Buckeye fans out there saying, "Oh, McCord's not the guy, and I still want Devin Brown." And I don't get it. I don't understand where some people still may feel that Kyle McCord isn't the dude. I mean, okay, yeah, his completion percentage isn't outstanding, but he is remaining mistake-free. He's had 1 interception that was in the season opener on the road, and since then, he hasn't thrown an interception. The one gripe I would say is that maybe he's using Marvin Harrison a little too much as his security blanket. I mean, yesterday it was crazy. I took a look at the stat line, and Harrison was targeted 15 times. Emeka Egbuka was the next most targeted with 4. So I kind of feel like maybe McCord is looking to his former high school teammate a little too often. I think that was one thing that C.J. Stroud was great at, was spreading the ball around, and McCord is kind of getting locked into 3 guys, and especially Harrison when it comes to certain plays. I think he needs to kind of look around the field a little bit better, see the field a little better, and distribute the ball. But honestly, other than that, I'm happy with his performance. Dylan, what about you?
Look, Kyle McCord's been fine. Been fine. He's been fine all year long. Every game he's been fine. That's not what Ohio State's come to expect from the quarterback spot. That's a tough sell to this fan base, obviously, who's gotten used to some prolific passers, to say, like, hey, just give this guy time. He's just gonna be fine. He's gonna continue to be fine. He's gonna get better. That's a tough sell. With that being said, like, if you'd have told me through 5 games that Kyle McCord was gonna, what's his stats? He's thrown for 3,000 yards, right? Just one interception. And that one interception, mind you, was, at Indiana. And that was one of those things on 4th down where he had to just try to throw the ball somewhere. So it wasn't even your true interception in the sense that he just, made a bad decision and threw the ball. That was a play where he had to throw the ball somewhere because it was 4th down and then they were going to lose the ball anyway. So, I mean, he really hasn't thrown a true interception. Now, of course, he's had opportunities, Notre Dame last week or 2 weeks ago. If that guy catches the ball just before the end of the game, everything feels different about Ohio State, but that's neither here nor there. So he's been solid. He's done what they ask him to. Now I have my issues with Kyle McCord projecting towards the end of the season and what they're going to need from him in games like coming up at Penn State and going to Ann Arbor and playing Michigan. But I think he's been solid. I think he'll continue to get better because there are some things that he just doesn't do well, i.e. see in the field, anticipating throws that you can only get better at doing by being in games and getting those reps and going back and looking at film and saying, this is what I saw, this is what I should have saw. All those things. So he will get better, but he's been fine. And one more thing I'll say is anybody who sits here and says that Kyle McCord shouldn't be the starter at Ohio State, or that that he sucks, or all these things you hear on on Twitter over the course of a week or throughout a game day and whatnot. Anybody who says that, those are probably the same people who were hell bent on Devin Brown starting to begin with. And those are the kind of people who just simply don't want to admit that they were wrong, that Kyle McCord was the guy. These are probably guys who said, I have a source who says Devin Brown's the guy, during camp, and he wasn't. These are guys that just don't want to admit that they were wrong. They don't want to admit that, there are times where Kyle McCord looks like, hey, it's obvious why he won this race, why he won this job, why he's starting at Ohio State. So, those kind of people are just, I'll leave it at that. So
they're a bunch of poop heads. That's what we'll call
yeah,
them,
that's the way to say it, Drew. So.
Yeah, and that's Dylan. Everything you just said was everything that Drew and I touched on last week. It just seems like there are let's face it, in life, we all want to be right. I told you so. See, I called it. I said that this was going to happen, and look what happened. The people that still doubt Kyle McCord, and maybe they can just prognosticate that far into the future and see that when they take on a team like Penn State, who has one hell of a defense, when they take on who up north, who has a hell of a defense, that McCord might not be the guy. But in that regard, is Devin Brown truly going to give you a better? Is he going to give you a better outcome than what McCord has already done at this point? And like you just said, I mean, he won the job for a reason. I've heard that too. People saying, "Oh, my sources tell me Devin Brown." You got all these social media influencers who say, well, I know my great uncle Pete has a neighbor down the street whose Aunt Loretta said that. And it's like, dude, just shut up. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. So to me, there is a reason that Kyle McCord won the job. He's done well enough, and like you said, Dylan, I mean, why hate on him at this point? Let's just wait and see what happens when we get to the game. Then we can rail on him about how he didn't get the job done.
I would add that Kyle McCord in the first half of yesterday's game was about as bad as you'll see a quarterback play at Ohio State. I don't want to make, I'm not making any excuses for Kyle McCord his first half performance was bad. And it was bad all the way around. The offensive line was awful, and that's a whole nother conversation. But Kyle McCord was bad. It wasn't just simply the fact that he didn't have time to throw. He was missing guys. He was staring down receivers. He was staring down one side of the field, and there were guys that were open that he just never saw, let alone made the throw. He just didn't see, and that's one of my biggest gripes with Kyle McCord is that he just doesn't see the field well. He doesn't go through his progressions quickly. He just needs to see a guy come open, and when he does that, when he sees a guy come open, he'll make a lot of good throws, So, and that's just part of experience as a quarterback. But make no mistake about it, he was bad in the first half, much better in the second half, which is kind of indicative of what we've seen from all year. Like there's some good things, and there's some things like you're hopefully it doesn't get you beat at some point. And so we'll see. We're going to find out in 2 weeks if he's good enough to win a game like that, because I promise you that Penn State's not going to let Ohio State, even if they could run the football, they're not going to let them run the football. They will challenge Kyle McCord and say, you have to beat us or you won't beat us. And we'll see if he can or not. So.
All right, moving on. Money Man Marv goes off despite a gimpy ankle. Marvin Harrison has 8 catches for 163 yards, 1 TD, and 1 touchdown versus Maryland. Now third of all time at Ohio State with 10 100-yard games. Led Saturday with 15 targets. CBS says 13 targets, Andy. So I think it's still way more targets than everybody else. Andy already talked about Ibuka was the next closest guy with 4 targets. We kind of talked about, McCord locking in on him too much. I think we already discussed he's not making productions. Marvin Harrison Jr., I don't think there's much to really complain about. I think we might have already covered those guys. So I think, what do we, just real quick rundown, what do we think of Marvin Harrison Jr. so far? Dillon.
If you look at his statistics, where he was last year, I don't know how he didn't win the Biletnikoff last year, which is just the grossest injustice ever. But anyways, if you look where he's at now, 25 catches, 499 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's on pace with all those numbers at this point last year, and he has 1 less touchdown, I think. Given everything we just talked about the quarterback play and its inconsistencies, he's right on pace with what he did last year. A marvelous season. Look, this guy is going to go, if he stays healthy, if he stays on the field, he's going to go on to win the Biletnikoff as the best receiver in the country. If the Heisman Trophy were a truly fair, race of who the best player in the country is and not just a glorified quarterback trophy, he'd probably be in New York for the Heisman too, because he's obviously one of the best players in the game. And he's going to go down as one of the best receivers in Ohio State history. Like he's that good. He's that good. He's that big of a mismatch. And just real quick to the point of like targeting him too much, I understand that. I have a bigger problem with him targeting him too much because it's part of a larger problem of Kyle McCord just not seeing the field well. But if you're going to target a guy too much, Marvin Harrison Jr. is an alien, and that's the kind of guy that you want to make sure that he's getting the 12, 13 targets a game. So.
Yeah,
Andy,
absolutely. Come on, dude. He's the money man, baby. It is a shame, Dillon. You're absolutely right that truly running backs and wide receivers and really just every other position on the field, you could even go defense, that these guys don't get love when it comes to the Heisman Trophy. And I get it, there's the Biletnikoff, you got your own wide receiver trophy, you got the Doak Walker, your own running back, the Thorpe, the Butkus, the, Lombardi, all of that stuff. But still, when we're giving out the Heisman, even the Walter Camp, these trophies that are designated to be given to the best player in the nation, it is a crime that Harrison wasn't involved in that process last year. And it was an even bigger crime that he wasn't even, was he nominated even for the Biletnikoff?
Yeah.
I know he was,
yeah.
He wasn't.
He finished second.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, what was the kid from Tennessee, Jalen something or other?
Jalen Hyatt.
That ended up winning.
Yeah.
And he had a good season, but at any rate, how can you? The dude we saw, all 3 of us were down there Wednesday at the Woody, saw him walking around kind of in a, cast type deal, a plastic, thing on his ankle. And I'm like, oh, man, he's claiming that this injury is worse than the sprain he played through last year. And I'm like, okay, hopefully maybe he can have a couple catches, 3-4 catches, 30, 40 yards, maybe get him a touchdown. Nah, 8, 163 in a score. So for him to be going through apparently worse pain than what he went through last year and to put up those numbers last year, and at least as of right now, through one game, 1.5-ish game of playing through the kind of sprain that he's apparently going through. It's dumb. It's silly. Just as long as he keeps playing, if you don't give him at least the Biletnikoff this year, then I'm going to quit watching football and ESPN in general, because the whole system is rigged at that point. So
I think we're ready to move on. So, run game. Buckeyes number 9 in the Big Ten, 131 yards per game. It's I mean, for me, like, I haven't really had any opinions. The offensive line is not good, and they're just not playing well. I mean, even just in general, like, fundamentally, the Buckeyes are doing a lot of stupid things, like penalties every game, like 10 stupid penalties, intentional groundings 2 games in a row, sideline penalties. Ryan Day getting mad and standing on the sideline just because I mean, was it? I mean, they got warned.
Yeah, there's
You
always a
guys were
warning
there.
before. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
they
always a
got
warning
warned,
before
and
it
then
happens.
they kept infracting, and then it doesn't matter how mad you get. If they're warning you, it means get off the sideline. I mean, some refs,
Yeah.
that's they're establishing their territory. I got a fly flying around me for some reason, guys. Sorry
I
about that.
noticed that
And then
myself.
yeah, it's like Mike Pence having the fly in my head. Anyway, there's so many questions with the running games. So you guys are actual reporters. I am not. Word on the street yesterday, Travion doesn't play because he didn't go to class. That's obviously not what Ryan Day said. There's so many unanswered questions. I mean, where's Dallin Hayden? Where's Evan Pryor? Why is Mayan Williams not running? What's going on with the run game? Andy, you start us out with this. What do you think about the run game? Is it really our backs? Is it our crappy line? What's going on in your opinion?
I think that the offensive line is one of the reasons for the lack of a run game. I think not having I love me some Chip, I love me some Chop, I love me some Trey, I do. But Chip Trainum is not an explosive running back. And honestly, I kind of felt yesterday there were times, and I don't know if you saw the same thing, Dylan, but I could have sworn that there were a few runs where he just kind of bowled himself right into the line, and there was a hole off to the side that he could have run through. Now he would have taken on a defender, but better than trying to just kind of push your way into the offensive lineman to burrow forward for about 3 or 4 yards. And that's just, I think that's just kind of the type of running back that Chip is. He's not explosive, but he's going to put his head down. He's going to get you a few yards, as we saw against Notre Dame. But Mayan, the way that he was running the football, granted it was late in the game yesterday, and I'm sure that Maryland probably had their second team out there. They might have not. I wasn't really paying attention to who they were substituting in on defense that late in the game. But I mean, Mayan ran with authority on a couple of those runs. I mean, one run, dude, he put his head down and he laid out that Maryland defender. And I mean, about half the crowd was still there, but of the half that was there, I mean, you heard, whoa! I mean, the crowd reacted to that kind of run. I just think it is what it is. As I told you, Drew and Dylan yesterday, uh, if this team gets 120, 125 yards, a touchdown, maybe 2 on the ground every game, I know I personally at this point will be satisfied with that. And I think that's Ryan Day too. I think he sees the offensive line as a little his running backs are, they are what they are. You do have a fast guy in Trey, but apparently, yeah, as far as not going to class and all that stuff, I didn't hear anything about that. Maybe you've heard differently, Dylan, but I just think right now the run game is what it is because that's just kind of who Ryan Day is. He sees what the offensive line is about, and it's just kind of what we're going to expect to see from here on out for the rest of the season.
Just real quick to address that Travion thing. I had not heard anything like that. I had my own speculations yesterday when I saw, that Travion was running around before pregame, jumping, sprinting, all those things that, that you probably wouldn't do if you had some kind of lower body injury, doing those things. So I had my own, thoughts yesterday. Now Ryan said what he said after the game. Wouldn't be the first time a head coach just said, yeah, he was injured and we kept him out and he'll be back next week because it sounds like he will be back next week. Again, to that point, Ryan made it sound like it was an abundance of caution, but if that was the case, then he probably shouldn't play next week against Purdue either, but so I don't want to speculate on it. I don't know, I don't know the answer. I certainly haven't heard anything about, the whole class thing and whatnot. It seemed a little bit off to me, but I will probably never know the true answer to that. But with that being said, as far as the run game goes, the issue is obviously up front. It's just not a good offensive line. It's just not a good offensive line, and it's not going to get better. That's the thing that and I said this in camp after the Indiana game, that offensive line, they might improve a little bit, but it'll be marginal improvements. If they're an average offensive line, then they might get to being a little slightly above average offensive line, but they weren't going to make some jump from average to great over the course of 6, 7, 8 weeks, and all of a sudden be rolling by the time they go to Ann Arbor. It's just not a good offensive line. I don't know why people like Luke Montgomery and Tay Grishabola, guys like that won't get a chance. I understand that it would be a very difficult message to send your team if you're reshuffling your offensive line personnel wise in the middle of a season, or I guess about halfway through the season. But if you think that your offensive line is a liability, if it's going to be a hindrance to you potentially winning the Big Ten and going back to the college football playoff, do it now instead of just getting to week 8 or week 9 and saying, yeah, these guys never got any better. They're every bit of what I thought they were. So I don't understand why they won't give guys like Luke Montgomery, who were allegedly, they were right in the race all the way up to the end of camp. So it's not like there was some big gap between them and guys like Josh Fryer or Josh Simmons or any of these guys. So if they were right there, then why not give them a chance? I don't understand that. But it's not going to get better. They keep on running that offensive line out there. It's not going to get better. That run game is going to continue to be a liability. You talk about the stat down at the bottom of the screen, 31 yards a game. That's boosted by a 200-yard effort against Western Kentucky. They don't run for 204 yards against Western Kentucky. That number looks a lot more like 110 a game, So, anyways,
total rushing yards yesterday with the because of so many negatives from 23 yards minus rushing, we were only at 64 yards on the day. So I mean,
I don't look at
the sack
rushing. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. I was just saying, Mayan Williams rushed 6 times for 23 yards and lost yardage pretty much. Just pretty much took out his yardage. But with that, I mean, let's say we get rid of the negative yardage, we're still only at 87 yards rushing yesterday, which is not good.
Stack adjusted yards are tough to go by just because, but I guess when you're talking about the offensive line, it's fine to go by that because it just further expounds what I'm saying about the offensive line just not being very good, which is no secret. But when it talks about just your true running game, how you run the football, I guess I don't take sack adjusted rushing yards into account because I want to know what this team does when they just line up and run the football. Now again, pass protection might be an issue as well behind a bad offensive line, and ultimately it does affect your rushing yards. But just when you're talking about the true running game and whether this running game can get going or whatnot, I try not to look at sack adjusted yards, but that's okay because even without sack adjusted yards, they still suck. So the point doesn't really change. The point doesn't really change. So and talking about Mayan, Andy, I don't know what's going on with mine. I have no idea what happened there. I'm a big believer in Trevion Henderson. I think that he by far has the best vision of the running backs, and he's the most explosive of the running backs. And I guess if I was going to build a running back, if you could just give me two traits, I want them to be explosive and I want them to have great vision. So because when Chip will hit a hole hard if the hole's right in front of him. Chip doesn't really see, and you were right what you said, Andy. There were multiple times yesterday where I saw, well, there was a hole there, and he just ran into a pile of people. But there was a cutback lane. There was a cutback lane. You good over there?
My
You all right?
cat just clawed me. Dude, what are you doing? Get away.
Getting attacked by cats. Jeez Louise.
Yeah, there was some cutback lanes there. Chip's fine, whatnot, but like again, when I watch Chip play, I see Mayan. I see a guy who runs with a lot of physicality, but Mayan production wise, nobody's ever looked at Mayan and said like this guy just shouldn't be playing out there for at this level. Mayan's been fine, and I don't. But somewhere along the way, Chip passed him on the depth chart. I tried to ask Ryan about this in camp, and or I guess not in camp. It was probably early in the season when it was very clear that like Mayan just he wasn't seeing the field. It was Trevion and Chip, and then maybe Mayan get a carry or two. I mean, it became very clear that like there's a pecking order here, and Mayan's third on it. And of course, Ryan danced around the question, so we don't look at it as a depth chart, but they do. I promise you, Mayan Williams looks at it as a depth chart. He looks at it as I'm third, I'm second. Those two guys are in front of me. And I'm not getting carries. So I don't understand the whole case with Mayan. It's like I said, at some point, somewhere along the way, they established that they think Chip is better than Mayan, and that's their decision. But bottom line is Trevion Henderson's the best running back on this team. And if they're going to have a running game that's even, I don't even want to call it formidable. They're never going to get to formidable. If they want to get to a point where they have a running game that doesn't suck, I guess they need Trevion on the field because he's the one guy that can turn, a 6-yard gain into 26 yards. If somebody takes a bad angle, or if there's not a second level defender there ready to shut it down, he might take a 6-yard gain, 66 yards to the house. He's the one guy that gives Ohio State that ability and that opportunity. So he needs to be on the field if they're going to even just have a decent running game. So.
Well, let's transition to the saving grace of this Ohio State Buckeyes team, the defense. Yesterday, Josh Proctor finally finding footing, 7 tackles, 1.5 tackles for a loss, 1 pick six, which was the first score of the game. Tommy Eichenberg I think he had like a combined total of like 13 or 14 tackles too, with in between assists and solo tackles. Big day from the linebackers. I did see a lot of pressure being put on by the defensive line, but JT Tilamolo, I'm never good with the Samoan last names.
Say it like this. This is how I heard Jerry Emick, SID, say it to somebody else, and I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. So it's Tui, and then like Rolo the candy, Molo Al, Tui Molo
Al. Yeah, it's putting it together.
Tui Molo Al.
Anyways, 4 tackles. We finally got some defensive line sacks. The Buckeye Nation's losing their mind, even though our defense looks pretty dominant, but no defensive line sacks. We got weird things like defensive lines going into pass coverage constantly. What are your guys' thoughts? The defense yesterday, we finally got some targets to Denzel Burke as well. Denzel Burke had a pretty good game. Dillon, what are your thoughts? We'll start with you.
I thought they played really well. There were some people that I guess, and I imagine they're probably the same people that are never happy with anything, that will always find something to gripe about after Buckeye games, Buckeye wins, I should add. But I thought overall they were solid. Now in the first half, I thought there were way too many occasions where Maryland ran the football right at Ohio State, and Ohio State didn't respond that well. Maryland moved the football on the ground against Ohio State in the first half and through the air as well. So that was a little alarming to me. But I thought overall, if you'd have told me that Ohio State was going to hold a good Maryland offense to 17 points, I would have signed up for that, right away, and to force 2 turnovers to get 1 into the end zone and a critical play, a huge play, a play that Ohio State had to have as a spark in that first half when nothing was going right. I was very pleased with Ohio State's play. They got the pressure, they got some pressure on them. They needed that. Maybe didn't always get home, but they affected Tagovailoa. So I thought overall it was a very good effort in line with what I've come to expect of that Ohio State defense. I still think that maybe they've aired too much on the side of the bend but don't break thing. I still think that they're over adjusting for last year's mistakes with the big plays. I think there's still a little bit of a middle ground to find between not being overly aggressive, being stupid aggressive in situations where you don't need to be and putting yourself in harm's way. But also, being a little more aggressive with the personnel they have, which is probably going to be talent-wise more than just about everybody they play, with very few exceptions. So I'd like to see them strike a more of a balance of being a little bit more aggressive. But overall, I think this is, this unit's. I think it's a legitimately good defense, potentially top 10 defense. I think they proved that again against a pretty good offense. I think they can get better, but I think that the only way they're going to get better is if they continue to tinker with some of the guys and the way they use them. And this is probably another conversation for a different day, but I think that the way they use Sonny Styles is just wrong. I think they continue to just botch the whole Sonny Styles thing in the way that that they put him, the way they deploy him. And I still think that CJ Hicks should be on the field. Steel Chambers has not played that well lately. He just hasn't. I mean, I say that to some people, and people just think what? What do you mean? How can how's Steele not playing well? He just hasn't played that well. On the touchdown, the lone touchdown in the second half for Maryland, he got shook out of his shoes by Tagovailoa. It's just a play you got to make. You're 1-on-1 with the quarterback right at the gut. You just got to make the play. And he didn't. I don't know if he even got a hand on him. I think his shoes are still on the field because he came right out of his shoes. So it's just a play you got to make. It's just a play you have to make. And I'm not saying one play defines how a guy's playing, but I just don't think he's played well overall. And I look at a guy like CJ Hicks and just the remarkable athlete he is, and I think he should be on the field. But that's neither here nor there. They are who they are personnel wise. That's not probably going to change this year. So I'm impressed with them. I think they're legitimately a top 20 defense. And if anybody told you that coming into the season, if they told Buckeye fans, hey, you're going to have a top 20 defense, will you take that? Anybody would say yes. Please sign me up. So,
Andy, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, well, and as I told you last week, Drew, I've been very schizophrenic with this defense. I mean, at the beginning of the year, I said, "Hey, don't be surprised if actually this defense is going to be possibly the saving grace of a couple of games for this Buckeye team." And I think that they were last or 2 weekends ago against Notre Dame. Saturday afternoon against Maryland, at first they gave up opening touchdown to the Terrapins, but of course they were working on a short field because of a weird fake punt that was botched that wasn't supposed to be a fake, that ended up being a fake. At any rate, Maryland was only working with 30 yards at that point. So easy for them, I guess, working on a short field to get a touchdown. However, that once again, the fourth quarter, me was just crazy, to only allow Tagovailoa in that offense to get 10 damn yards for the entire fourth quarter. That right there spoke the biggest volume to me, is the way that defense really locked down in the fourth quarter. I mean, ultimately they didn't allow Tagovailoa too many plays with his feet. There was the 9-yard touchdown run that, he made Steel Chambers not look too good. I personally have not been displeased with Steel Chambers' performance this year. I think he's played well enough, honestly. I do think that a guy like CJ Hicks, though, should be seeing the field. I mean, we all heard in the fall camp and spring practice about CJ Hicks, like CJ, Jim Knowles, CJ going to see the field this year, man. He's going to see the field. Okay, I hear crickets chirping right now, Jim. Where's CJ Hicks? The whole Jack Sawyer thing and Jack standing up, playing the Jack. Some people are telling me, well, just because he's a defensive end and he's standing up doesn't mean he's playing the Jack. Well, if he's sinking back into coverage like I've seen Jack do a couple of times, guess what? Jack is playing a Jack, and we were told that Jack would not play the Jack. So I'm overall, I am happy with this defense. But I do think that there are some things that they could get better on. And I feel like we've kind of been told one thing and we're seeing another when it comes to other aspects like Jack Sawyer, like CJ Hicks. And to your point, Dillon, it does seem like Sonny Styles is being underutilized, but I would actually kind of like to hear a little bit more of your opinion on that and how you think he's being underutilized and what Jim Knowles might be able to do to utilize him more properly.
I see Sonny. I see him in coverage a lot, and you talk about and again getting into the inner workings of Jim Knowles' defense. I'm not going to try to do that, but I see Sonny Styles in coverage a lot, and then I see this guy just be an absolute wrecking ball when he's coming downhill towards the line of scrimmage, and I think there's not. I don't want to call it the Jack, but there's not a way to get Sonny Styles in the box defensively on 70% of your plays, and you can't tell me that's not an asset to the defense to have Sonny Styles, that guy playing in the box, for 70% of your snaps. Now, obviously, that's all, the game plan and who you're playing and whatnot, and maybe that. But I don't want to see Sonny Styles in coverage. I think he struggled in coverage several times this year that I've seen. But and then they bring him out. They bring him out for a lot more of your traditional, for a lot of the more
Jordan
traditional
Hancock.
sets. They bring Hancock in, yeah. So I just feel like there's got to be a way to get that kind of guy, and maybe this is a product of how well Josh Proctor and Lathan Ransom are playing, because maybe he should be playing more of a traditional bandit safety role, or even the adjuster. But and I have no problem with Lathan Ransom or the way Josh Proctor's playing. I think those guys have been fantastic this year. I think it's been a massive reason why this defense has taken a big step forward. So I have no problem with those guys playing. So maybe it's a byproduct of that. Maybe he's just sitting behind guys that are playing really well. I just have such a problem with the way constantly seeing him come off the field, and when he's on the field, he's lost in coverage somewhere, as opposed to playing around the line of scrimmage. It's just a shame. And I want to just add real quick too about Steel Chambers. I don't think he's playing bad at all. I don't think he's been bad by any means. I just think that he's not playing great. And I'm not saying it's time you make a move. I'm not even saying that CJ Hicks would be that guy, because they obviously like Cody Simon a lot. I know Cody Simon played a lot yesterday. He played a lot. So whether that was correlated to the way Steele was playing, I'm not sure. But Cody Simon played a lot yesterday. So take that for whatever it's worth. I just know that they need more out of Steel Chambers. And Tommy's been playing well, but Tommy missed a couple tackles yesterday as well too. So I just think they need more out of their linebackers. Period. I think those guys are fine, and I think they'll continue to be fine. But I just think that they need to step up and play a little bit better. So and maybe that's the next step for that defense, is that maybe there is another level for those guys, Tommy and Steele, to reach, and this defense takes another level or another step forward as a result. So, but I think overall defensively they're fine. There's just the whole CJ Hicks thing bothers me, because that's a guy who, if he transfers out of this program at the end of the year, we would never have gotten to see what kind of guy CJ Hicks is. And I understand. I would never advocate for, hey, play this guy to keep him happy so he doesn't transfer. To hell with that stuff. I hate that whole notion that you have to play guys so they don't transfer. Not at a place like Ohio State. If if you're a smaller program and you happen to land a big recruit, and you want to keep him happy, then sure, fine, whatever. But at Ohio State, you don't play that game of, hey, play him to keep him happy. There's too much talent here, and there'll continue to be too much talent. But if CJ Hicks leaves and we never got a chance to really see him on the field, that's gonna suck. I mean, no two ways about it. That's gonna be a tough one, because he's such a talented athlete. So.
So, are the Buckeyes tough? Yes or no? Andy.
What? Huh? You need me for something, honey? Okay, I'll be right out. Uh, yeah, yes and no, yes and no, yes and no.
They're tough in the
You
fourth
know,
quarter.
tough in the fourth quarter. They did what they had to do. They were tough on that last drive against Notre Dame. But is it sustained toughness? Physical toughness. The defense is tough. The defense is tough. I think there are some tough guys on that offense too. Think Kyle McCord is tough. Marvin Harrison is tough. Mayan Williams, Chip Trainum, they are tough. But really, where and this is my perception, and maybe this is unfair. But and Dillon, we were talking about this yesterday. When you see an offense that they're not accruing a lot of rushing yards, and to me, rushing yards really do speak to being a tough team. If you're knocking that opposing defensive line on their butts and you're gaining good chunks of rushing yards, that makes you look like a tough team. Now, once again, is that a fair perception? I don't know. Maybe it's not. There could be people out there that are watching, listening, that are saying, Andy, you're an idiot. You have no idea what you're freaking talking about. So shut the hell up. Um, but to me, this does not look like as tough of a team, I think, as we would like to see. So once again, yes, there are some tough guys. Mentally tough to grind it out. Once again, for final drive against Notre Dame, fourth quarter against Maryland. Yes, mentally tough, grinding it out, sticking to it. But an overall, toughness, I think they got a little bit of work to do. Of course, this coming from a middle-aged man with gray hair on his chin, so fat and out of shape that if you ask me to get out there and run one offensive play, I'd probably die of a
I hear
heart
you.
attack. So
Hey,
take it for what it's worth.
Your job is to be critical of the team. It's not to be an athlete. Dillon.
I the whole idea of toughness, like it's just, this whole conversation has been funny to me for a while now. Like, toughness as if it's like this physical, like you can obtainable achievement, like where it's just right out there. Let me grab this toughness and like, oh, am I tough now? What does toughness look like? How does that manifest on the field? Mentally tough. I think Ohio State proved their mettle, like Andy said 2 weeks ago in South Bend. I think you don't win a game like that. You don't put a drive together like that. If you're not a mentally tough football team. I think yesterday you don't win a game like that if you're not a mentally tough football team, because for as bad as that first half was, and going into halftime in a tied football game, teams that aren't mentally tough, they probably don't respond well coming out of halftime. And then Maryland, for them to go right down the field and score to start the second half, a team that's not mentally tough really doesn't respond after that. That's a kick, that's a punch to the gut right there. For you to go into halftime with a little bit of momentum. We talked about how big that, botched field goal, whatever, at the end of the half was for Maryland, and how excited Ohio State's defense was, and Ohio State in general, running off the field. If you call that momentum, and then Maryland comes out to start the second half, goes right down the field, punches you in the mouth, Shake steals Chambers out of his shoes, Tagovailoa did, on his way to the end zone, and they take a 17-10 lead. Tough teams, or non-tough teams, they don't respond to that. So I think Ohio State clearly has a tough, whatever toughness is, tough football team, from a mental standpoint. I don't know what physical toughness, how that looks like on the field. I mean, I do. I agree with you to some degree, Andy, that, like, when I think about tough physical football teams, it's like everybody wants to say toughness. I think it's more of a question, a challenge of their physicality. Are they a physical football team? I think somewhere along the lines, toughness and physicality has they've kind of been blurred, in this whole conversation about Ohio State, and it's more a conversation of their physicality than their toughness. They lost the Michigan game in 2021 in Ann Arbor because they weren't a physical football team. They were not physical enough to match Michigan's physicality. They lost that Michigan game last year in the second half because they weren't physically, as imposing as Michigan was, and they ultimately folded under Michigan's physicality. So I think it's more of a physicality question, not a toughness question. And the physicality is a little bit easier to answer because that does come down to running game, Andy, as you point. It's not about toughness. I don't know where it became toughness. It's about the physicality. Is Ohio State a physical football team? Not physical enough. Not, I mean, in my eyes, not the kind of physicality they need to go beat. I'm not going to say Penn State. I'm not going to say that they can't beat Penn State or they're not on similar levels, physically. But I do know that after watching them fail in back-to-back second halves against Michigan because they weren't physically tough enough, tough, whatever you want to call it. I don't see that this team all of a sudden is like, oh, this is a team that's going to go to Ann Arbor and they're going to take it to Michigan. They're going to tell Michigan, like, we're going to push you around. We're going to dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And we're going to be that team in the second half that gets stronger and stronger as the game goes on. And ultimately, you guys are going to fold under, how physical we are as a football team. I don't see that at all. Obviously, the proof is in the pudding with the running game. So I don't see that at all. But I wanted to kind of, delineate that, like, there's a difference between, like, the toughness that everybody keeps on talking about. Like, they are a tough football team. They've always been a tough football team. Like, they have. Like they don't, quit in games. They don't fold in games. But the real question has always been physicality, and that's where it started. I don't know where it became toughness along the line or down the road, but it's always been about the physicality. That's been the question for Ryan Day's program. And to my eyes right now, I don't see the team that, again, they're not physically soft. They're not a soft program. Some people like to go to extremes and say, well, if you're not physical, that means you're soft. They're not a soft program. Are they physical enough to beat who they have to beat to get to where they want to go? And in my eyes right now, I don't see a team that's physically capable of going to Ann Arbor and pushing that team around and winning that football game. That's the issue at hand for me. So,
well, it's good questions. Are they good enough to go to Lafayette and win? Boilermakers 2-4 overall, 1-2 in the Big Ten. They lost their coach Brom, who we all saw in Louisville stomp Notre Dame last night. Can the Buckeyes suffer another setback like 5 years ago? Haven't played in West Lafayette since 2018 debacle. Dillon, what are your thoughts?
there is no chance in hell that Purdue wins that football game. So just get that out of the way right now. That is a bad Purdue football team. They're not getting good quarterback play out of Hudson Card. I think he's doing 5 interceptions already to 6 touchdowns. So that's a guy who's going to throw the ball to you as much as he might throw the ball to his own team. So they're not going to be able to make plays in the passing game. If you think about that 2018 debacle, with Rondale Moore and their ability to make plays in the passing game, like, that was just it was still a shocker, but you could see how, you could see why it was an issue, especially because, that 2018 defense was bad, as we all, ultimately came to find out. That was a bad defense. So, but this is Purdue Michigan. Yeah, well, yeah. And even though they gave up 40 points to that in that game as well, so just offensively. But yeah, this is a bad Purdue team. We talked about the running game earlier. If Ohio State can't run the football in this game, Purdue's given up, I think, 155 yards per game on the ground, which is like 85th in the country. If Ohio State can't run the football in this game, then I mean, you can just go ahead and put it away and say they will never run the football against anybody. They're that bad of a running team. So they got to run the football this week. I think they will to a pretty successful degree. And like I said, Purdue's offense isn't gonna. They're just not gonna be able to put a whole lot together. It's blowout city. It's a 38-10 kind of game, something like that. And Ohio State will come back 6-0 and get ready for the big one against Penn State.
Andy.
Yeah. And if Purdue, here's the thing, okay. Playing in West Lafayette, actually, for Ohio State, you can go all the way back to, Jim Tressel the last 20 years. Playing in Purdue, for some reason, has always been, not always, but has been a thorn in Ohio State's side. 04, they went over there and lost. 09, one of their 2 losses in 09 was at Purdue, and that was like a bad Purdue team. 2 years later, in the Luke Fickell season, they lost again in 2011. Then, of course, the debacle in 2018 for their only loss, but it was to a team that went like 6-7 by 29 points. So anything could happen, right? I mean, let's face it, anything can happen. Should it happen? Absolutely not. To Dylan's point, I mean, yeah, this is a Purdue team that's not woefully awful, but they do have one more interception than Ohio State's defense. I mean, they got 6 on the year. Yeah, however, they are giving up, let me see, passing yards. They're giving up 226 a game on the ground. Like you said, Dylan, they're at 153. Um, and their scoring defense. I mean, they're averaging 4 touchdowns a game defensively. So I I don't see any reason why Ohio State should go over there and have some issues. Once again, anything can happen. But yeah, this is a bad 2-4 Purdue team. I mean, they got a nice win on the road, pretty convincing win against Virginia Tech, but the Hokies are looking just about as bad as Purdue is. And Purdue did beat the snot out of Illinois at home. But otherwise, other than that, um, yeah, the Ohio State should easily go over there and win by 3 touchdowns, if not 4 or 5. So I see a big win next weekend in West Lafayette for the Buckeyes for sure.
All right, well, finishing up here quickly, and then we got to wrap it up. Overall, it's halfway through the season. How do we see the total college football landscape? Even though we're not happy with a lot of Ohio State, how do we really fit into the bigger picture? I mean, how good are the other teams? Andy, let's start with you, and then we can finish it out with Dylan, and we can see how do we think the Buckeyes compare to other teams. I mean, I don't personally, I don't think a lot of teams are that impressive. A lot of teams aren't playing very tough competition either, with the exception of who knows how good the teams are. Notre Dame's playing; they are all ranked that they've been playing the last few weeks. So Andy, how do you think we look in the big picture of things?
I think right now, big picture, to Dylan's point, the physicality factor concerns me that they're able to truly compete, at least offensively, against any other team in the country. I personally think if they ran up against Georgia defense, um, Alabama's defense, Penn State's defense, which you're going to run into here in a couple weeks, and the Smelly Rodents defense. That offense is right now. I'm not confident that they could get the job done. I'm with Dylan on that one, but defensively, I think this defense can hang with just about any offense in the country. Right now they've 3 offenses in a row. Maybe Notre Dame's offense and Sam Hartman a little bit overrated after what we saw last night against Louisville. Then again, Louisville could be a lot better than were originally thought. That remains to be seen. Obviously, at the end of the year, we'll know a bit more about that. But going into that Notre Dame game, I mean, Sam Hartman was flinging the rock. Their offense was looking unstoppable, and they stopped him. They pretty much corralled Talia Tungavailoa, who came in, atop the Big Ten and had all these passing records at Maryland. Same with Western Kentucky. They had a prolific passing offense year before. They're not looking so hot this year, but still, people had Austin Reed, their quarterback, and Malachi Corley, their wide receiver, as being NFL draft picks, and a lot of people still do. So the fact that Ohio State's defense was able to contain, those 3 offenses that up to this point in the season, or at least at that point in the game, were thought to be pretty prolific offenses, I do feel confident that the defense, honestly, can get the job done. It's a complete reversal as we felt the last couple of seasons at Ohio State, where it was like, oh, the offense is going to put up 5, 6, 7 touchdowns a game. It's the defense that we got to be concerned about. Now, for me, it is a complete reversal. I still am very wary. I called this as a 3-loss. They still got Nittany Lions in 2 weeks and the Rodents at the end of the year. And those 2 games, like, as we've stated, I just said a second ago, I mean, they do concern me. So right now, I still think this is, quite frankly, a 2-loss Ohio State team. But I think defensively they could get the job done against anybody. But yeah, I'm still going with my 2-loss prediction. But I mean, it still does look pretty wide open because nobody else looks truly dominant. You know, Texas loses, Notre Dame gets shredded by Louisville, an Oklahoma team that looked kind of like crap against Cincinnati ends up knocking off Texas. Alabama got knocked off at home by Texas, and but it's Alabama. You can never count out Nick Saban. So yeah, I'm still kind of wishy-washy on Ohio State being truly competitive with everybody else in the country, but I think for the most part they could hold their own at least defensively.
Dylan.
Yeah, I think the saving grace for this team right now and where it's at is that you can look across college football and there are no teams that just jump out as those dominant football teams that you're just not sure how you could beat if you paired up with them, if you matched up with them. There are no teams like that. There's not a team in college football that doesn't have a significant question mark still surrounding them. Georgia's a really good football team. Offensively, are they explosive enough to win games in the fashion that they'd had to sometimes last year when their defense, for all of its might and all of its talent, sometimes obviously the Peach Bowl, that Georgia offense had to go win that football game because that defense couldn't get stops for Georgia. So is that offense capable of doing that this year if they run up against an offense that can move the football against them? I'm not sure. I actually came into yesterday thinking that Texas might be the best team in college football just because I thought that they had the weapons on offense and then their front seven on defense. I thought that they might have been the most complete team in college football. Maybe that is still Washington. I'm not sure. But again, every one of these teams has question marks. So from Ohio State's standpoint, they are a flawed football team. Make no mistake about it. There's no way around it. The Ohio State is a flawed football team. But I think every team is a flawed football team in college football. There are your upper echelon teams that, maybe their flaws are, relatively speaking, small or easily addressed. But Ohio State's right there. I mean, I have my doubts about Ohio State's ability again to beat Michigan. I'm not ready to say, what I think about the Penn State game in a couple of weeks just yet. But I've been willing to continue to say that I have my doubts about Ohio State's ability to go up there to Ann Arbor and win that football game. So what that means on the national landscape, I'm not sure. Obviously, still much is still have to be decided. I know that Notre Dame loss yesterday doesn't really help Ohio State because if you're going to talk about going up to Ann Arbor and losing that game, you need that Notre Dame game to be one of those selling points on your resume. And Notre Dame has to go play USC next week. So all of a sudden you can be looking at a Notre Dame team with 3 losses through 7 weeks. And I know Notre Dame is probably tired of this has been a gauntlet for them from the Ohio State game on. Then they had to go to Duke and beat Duke Super Bowl, college game day at Duke, all the hoopla that comes with that. And then they go to Louisville this week for another night game. And now they got to go play USC next week in the rivalry game against obviously a very good offense, but a trash defense. So anyway, so that Notre Dame.
Yeah, is that like 4 night games in a row for Notre Dame?
Yeah.
This is going to be like 4 night games in a row. That's crazy. Come on.
4 ranked teams.
Yeah, it's all ranked teams. That is a gauntlet. That's crazy.
So that loss or that win for Ohio State, I'm not sure what that ends up looking like at the end of the year. They're going to need it to look like a good win, a really good win on the road, if they're going to go to Michigan and get beat and still have a chance to make the playoff. But like I said, they're I don't think they're any more flawed than most teams in college football at the top of these rankings. I think that I know that if I had a flaw, I wouldn't want it to be my offensive line. I think that's just a fatal flaw. I think that's just like some flaws you can overcome. Like Ohio State almost overcame a bad defense last year. I mean, they were a field goal away from going to play for a national championship and probably winning that game despite how bad their defense was. That's the craziest thing about it. They could overcome that because their offense was that good. I think your offensive line being a fatal flaw is a non-starter. Like that's just if you're bad on the offensive line, like it's going to cost you a game, maybe 2 somewhere down the line. And that concerns me. That bothers me from Ohio State's standpoint. But they're right there. They're right there. And we're going to learn a lot in 2 weeks. It's almost a question that I almost just want to say, talk to me in 2 weeks. Let me see how they handle Penn State's defense and how they handled that pressure, how Kyle handled that pressure. Were they able to generate something in the running game against a defense that was going to say, hey, you're not going to run the ball against us. So, but for now, for now, I mean, I think Ohio State fans should be, happy to be 5-0 and understand that, there's things that, they have to get better at. And there's probably things that they're not going to get better at, and whatever that means, does that cost them eventually? I don't know. Probably, maybe not. Does it cost Georgia at some point? I don't know. Maybe not. What does it cost? Is Michigan that good? They haven't played anybody. Are they that good? I don't know. Maybe they'll find out, or maybe they won't. I don't know. So every team has this, hey, we'll find out, or maybe we won't. I don't know. Kind of thing going on with them. So, but the bottom line is to be 5-0, and probably going to be 6-0 after this week. And you come home and and you get ready for Penn State, and that'll be one of those kind of defining moments in the college football season, not just for those two teams, but and in the national landscape. So,
well,
Yep,
awesome,
absolutely
Dylan.
agree.
I agree as well. I think Ohio State beats Penn State at home, but it's still, can we go to Michigan and win? I mean, BGSU got 3 picks in the Big House, but and they're a terrible team. But it's just like,
Yeah.
it's almost like embarrassing if Wood County State University gets the 3 picks in the Big House and we don't. That's just as embarrassing. So, Dylan, thanks for joining us once again. Thanks for coming on the show. If people want to follow your work and follow your Twitter's good too. You get some pretty good videos for post-game pressers. I especially appreciate them during post Notre Dame's game. How can people follow you and your work?
At Dillon Davis 56 is my Twitter handle. So yeah, I try to get video. I know, video. Everybody loves to see the kind of things that we're fortunate enough to be able to cover, that they don't get to see. So I try to get a lot of video there and keep that on there. And so, yeah, so Dillon Davis 56 on Twitter, DelGazette.com for my work. There's a link on my Twitter handle as well to my stories and whatnot. So, but yeah, happy to join, guys, and thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking Buckeye football with you guys, and hope to do it again at some point soon.
Well, maybe we can reconvene after that big Penn State game. We play Wisconsin right after Penn State, right? So that's another big game.
Yeah.
So, well, guys, thanks again for tuning in. You can follow us all on Twitter. You can see our handles underneath if you're on video. Otherwise, if you're on audio only, it's at Andy's Wired and at Drew Sample. Do us a favor. Don't be a hoe and share the show. If you like this show, share it with your friends. Give it some reviews on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcast. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to bringing you guys another episode next week. And hopefully we'll be bragging about how good we looked against a crappy Purdue team.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.